My name is Emily, and the story I'm about to tell you is one I never thought I'd have to live through. It started like any other friendship, simple and pure, but ended in a way I couldn't have imagined. It all began with Sophie, my best friend, the one person who knew everything about me, who had been with me through the highs and lows, through the dreams and heartaches. Sophie and I had a bond that no one could break, or so I thought. We were more than friends. We were family. We shared our deepest secrets, our wildest dreams, and our darkest fears. No one had ever come close to understanding me the way she did. But that was before everything changed. I never saw it coming. Not in a million years. Sophie and I had been through so much together, and I trusted her with everything. But in the blink of an eye, everything fell apart. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle. Small things, like text messages left unread for hours, calls that went straight to voicemail. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid, that Sophie was just busy. But then, the excuses became more frequent. Plans would get cancelled last minute, and when we did meet, it felt like I was talking to a stranger. She seemed distant, distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something wasn't right. I tried to reach out, to talk to her about it, but every time, she brushed it off with a smile or a half-hearted excuse. I'm just stressed, Emily. Work's been crazy. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. It was the way she avoided my eyes. The way her responses felt rehearsed, like she was hiding something. But what could it be? What had changed? We'd always been there for each other. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. And then came that day when everything I had known about our friendship came crashing down. I had gone over to Sophie's apartment, thinking we would catch up, like we always did. I had my key, as usual, and when I walked in, I expected to find her sitting on the couch, maybe with a cup of coffee, ready to talk about everything. But when I walked through the door, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. I heard Sophie laughing, but it wasn't the usual laugh, the one that made me laugh even harder. No, this laugh was different. It was light, carefree, and it wasn't just for me. I froze in the doorway. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I could hear him too, the man I didn't recognize, laughing with her, sharing a moment that should have been mine. I couldn't make sense of it. Why was she laughing like that with him? What was happening? I stood there, hidden, paralyzed by the sound of their voices. I had to see for myself. I stepped forward, and that's when I saw them, Sophie and this man, sitting together on the couch, close, too close. And the worst part, they didn't even notice me standing there. I watched as they exchanged glances, shared inside jokes, and laughed about things I wasn't a part of. Sophie's hand brushed against his, and she smiled at him in a way I had never seen before. It was a smile meant only for him, a smile that crushed me in ways I didn't know I could feel. I don't know how long I stood there, watching, my heart breaking with every second that passed. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't wrap my mind around what I was seeing. Sophie, my best friend, the one person I trusted more than anyone, was betraying me. I had always thought we had a bond that couldn't be broken, but in that moment, I realized I was wrong. I didn't confront them right away. I couldn't bear to say anything, to let them see the pain in my eyes. I just turned and walked out, my heart heavy, my mind racing with a million questions I didn't have the answers to. How could Sophie do this to me? Why was she acting like this? What had I missed? I wanted to scream, but no words would come out. It was as if the betrayal had stolen my voice, my ability to even process what had just happened. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, about the way they looked at each other, about the way Sophie had shut me out. I tried to reach out to her, but she was distant. She wouldn't return my calls, and when I finally did get her on the phone, her voice was empty, like she didn't care. And maybe she didn't. Maybe all those years of friendship had meant nothing. It felt like I had been living in a lie, and the truth was staring me in the face. I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I couldn't be the victim here. I needed to do something. I couldn't let Sophie and him get away with this betrayal. They had taken something from me, something I could never get back. So, I started planning. Quietly, carefully. I wasn't gonna lash out in anger. No, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. My revenge would be calculated, precise, and it would make them feel every bit of the pain I was carrying. I watched them both. I observed Sophie's every move, paid attention to the way she interacted with him, how she tried to act like everything was fine when it was clear she was avoiding me. I made sure to stay in her life, just enough to make her believe I had forgiven her, that I was moving on. But I hadn't forgiven her, and I was going to make her regret what she had done. I knew that when the time was right, when she least expected it, I would strike, and she wouldn't see it coming. The plan I set in motion was simple but effective. I knew that Sophie would try to maintain the facade, that she would try to hide the truth from me for as long as possible. So I bided my time. I let her think she had gotten away with it. And when the moment came, I confronted her. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I simply showed her the messages, the evidence of her betrayal, the texts, the photos, the lies. I let her read every word, let her see the depth of the deception she had put me through. And when she looked at me, her face pale with guilt, I saw the truth in her eyes. She had nowhere to hide. But even as I confronted her, even as I showed her the damage she had caused, I realized something. Revenge wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. It didn't fill the emptiness. It didn't make the pain go away. It only reminded me of what I had lost. Sophie's regret, her apologies, didn't mean anything anymore. What was the point of making her suffer if it didn't heal me? I had set out to expose them, to make them feel the weight of their betrayal. But in the end, I was the one who had to carry the burden of the pain. When I walked away from that confrontation, I felt no satisfaction, only loss. A deeper sense of grief that I didn't know I was capable of feeling. Betrayal hadn't just broken my trust in Sophie. It had shattered something inside me. It had made me doubt myself, made me question everything I had ever believed in. I had spent so long plotting my revenge, thinking it would make everything better. But I realized that there was no joy in their downfall. There was only a deeper sense of loss, a realization that the person I thought I knew, the person I had trusted with everything, was gone. And there was nothing I could do to bring her back. The aftermath of all of it, the betrayal, the revenge, the fallout, left me empty. I had gotten my revenge, yes, but it didn't heal me. It didn't give me the closure I thought it would. It only left me more broken than before. And in the quiet moments that followed, I understood that sometimes revenge isn't the answer. Sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. Letting go of the anger, letting go of the hurt, and learning to forgive. Not just them, but myself. Betrayal had taught me a harsh lesson, one I never wanted to learn. But in the end, it was the lesson I needed, because through it all, I found strength. Strength in letting go, strength in forgiveness, and strength in knowing that no matter how deep the pain, I would move forward. The pain of it all lingered long after the confrontation. In the days that followed, I found myself walking through life like a ghost, existing but not truly living. I tried to pretend that everything was fine, that I had moved on, but I couldn't fool myself. The betrayal had cut deep, deeper than I could ever have imagined. It wasn't just about Sophie and him. It was about the trust I had given so freely, the love I had invested so fully, and how it had all been thrown back in my face. They had both taken something from me, something I could never get back, and I wasn't sure how to recover from it. In the beginning, I had thought that revenge would give me the satisfaction I was desperately searching for. I thought that once I exposed them, once they realized the depth of what they had done, I would feel whole again. But instead, it only left me with a deeper sense of loss. The pain didn't go away. It didn't heal the wounds that were now gaping open. In fact, it seemed to only widen them. I spent nights lying awake in bed, replaying everything over and over in my mind. I couldn't help it. Every word Sophie had said, every action, every moment where I had been blind to what was happening, echoed in my thoughts. It was maddening. I tried to move forward, to put it all behind me, but no matter what I did, it followed me like a shadow. I began to wonder whether revenge was worth it at all. Was it worth the time, the energy, the emotional toll? What had I really gained from it? I had exposed them. I had made them realize what they had done. But in doing so, I had also lost something more important than any sense of justice. I had lost my peace. I had become consumed by anger, by the need to make them feel what I felt. But when the dust settled, all I was left with was emptiness. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that revenge hadn't brought me the closure I had expected. It hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't healed me. Instead, it had only brought me face to face with the harsh reality that some wounds don't heal with vengeance. They heal with time, with acceptance, with letting go. I began to question myself. Who had I become in all of this? Had I lost myself in the process? In trying to make them feel the weight of their betrayal? Had I forgotten to take care of myself? I didn't recognize the person who had plotted all of this, who had let bitterness consume her every thought. That wasn't who I was. I had always prided myself on being someone who could forgive, someone who could see the good in others. But in my pursuit of revenge, I had become someone I didn't like. I had let anger guide me, and in doing so, I had let it eat away at the parts of me that I valued most. As the weeks passed, the guilt started to creep in. It wasn't just guilt for what Sophie had done, or for the fact that I had turned the tables on her and him. It was the guilt of realizing that in seeking revenge, I had hurt myself more than they ever could have. I had allowed myself to become bitter, to hold on to the past, to refuse to let go of the pain. I thought I was protecting myself, but in reality, I was only making myself more vulnerable. And worst of all, I had become consumed by something that had never been meant to define me. I started to see them both differently, but not in the way I had hoped. They had been my closest friends, the people I thought I could trust the most. But now, in the aftermath of everything, I saw them for what they truly were. They were flawed, just like everyone else, but they had made choices that betrayed me, that tore apart something beautiful that I had invested in. They were human, yes, but that didn't make what they did any less painful. But as much as I saw them differently, I also saw myself differently. I realized that the person I had become was not the person I wanted to be. I had let the betrayal define me, let it take over my thoughts, my actions, my very soul. And it wasn't until I took a step back, until I allowed myself to truly reflect on what had happened, that I understood the lesson I was supposed to learn. Revenge wasn't the answer. It never was. It was never going to fix the hurt. It was never going to heal the wounds. And in my pursuit of making them pay, I had only caused myself more pain. The hardest part of it all was accepting that sometimes you don't get closure. Sometimes people don't apologize. Sometimes the people you trust the most will hurt you in ways you can't understand. And you have to learn to live with that. You have to learn to let go, not for them, but for yourself. Because holding on to the anger, the bitterness, the resentment, it doesn't serve you. It only keeps you trapped in the past. Letting go was the hardest thing I had ever done. I had held on to the hope that revenge would somehow fix me, that making them feel my pain would make everything right. But it didn't. In fact, it only made things worse. It only made the hole in my heart deeper, because I realized that I was still holding on to the past, still holding on to the hurt, still holding on to the anger, and all of that was poisoning me from the inside out. Forgiveness was the hardest part. I didn't want to forgive Sophie. I didn't want to forgive him. But in order to heal, I had to. I had to forgive them for my own peace, not for theirs. I had to forgive them, because holding on to that anger, holding on to the pain, wasn't helping me. It was only keeping me stuck in a place I didn't want to be. It wasn't about excusing their actions. It was about freeing myself from the burden they had placed on me. I realized that forgiveness wasn't just for them. It was for me. The journey wasn't easy. It took time. It took patience. It took a lot of self-reflection. A lot of nights spent thinking about what I had gone through and what I needed to do to move forward. But eventually I found peace. I found the strength to let go of the anger, to forgive not just them, but myself. I realized that the revenge, the bitterness, the pain, none of that was going to bring me peace. Only forgiveness would. In the end, I learned that betrayal teaches you hard lessons, but it also shows you how strong you really are. It shows you that you can survive the worst of it, that you can move forward even when everything feels like it's falling apart. It taught me that sometimes the hardest thing to do is let go, but it's also the most important thing, because when you do, you free yourself from the chains of the past and you make room for a future that is full of possibility and peace. I'm not the same person I was before this happened. I'm stronger now, more self-aware. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean excusing what happened. It means finding peace in your heart and understanding that holding on to the past only keeps you from moving forward. I've learned that letting go is the only way to truly heal, and in that healing, I found a strength I never knew I had. The days after everything had happened felt strange. I remember waking up every morning with a tightness in my chest, an unshakable weight that I couldn't get rid of, no matter how hard I tried. The world around me felt different, like I was seeing it through a lens that had been cracked. Nothing seemed as bright, as vibrant as it had been before. There were moments when I would forget, when I would have a fleeting moment of peace, but then something would remind me of the betrayal. A memory, a song, a place, and it would all come rushing back, and I would feel the hollow ache deep in my gut again, the echo of what Sophie and him had taken from me. I didn't know how to move on. I didn't know how to stop the weight of it all from pressing down on me, day after day. But time, as it often does, kept moving forward. Slowly, little by little, the days became more bearable. The sharpness of the pain dulled, and I began to feel like I could breathe again. It wasn't instant. It wasn't easy, but each day was a little bit better than the last. I started spending more time by myself, giving myself the space I needed to process everything. I took long walks, letting my thoughts wander, letting the world around me sink in. The quiet of nature became a balm for my soul. I'd never realized how much peace could be found in silence. I learned to enjoy being alone, to find comfort in my own company. There were no expectations, no pressure to act a certain way. I could simply be. But even as I spent time healing, even as I found small moments of peace, there were always reminders of what I had lost. The truth was, I had built my entire life around the idea of Sophie and me being unbreakable, untouchable. We had been each other's constant, and to lose that, to realize that it had all been a lie, was something I couldn't fully shake. I began to realize something else too, something I didn't want to admit to myself at first, that my need for revenge, my need for closure, hadn't actually been about them. It had been about me. It had been about my desire to prove to myself that I wasn't weak, that I could take control of my own story, that I wasn't just going to sit back and let them get away with it. I had convinced myself that making them pay would make me feel better, would give me the peace I needed. But it didn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the pain wasn't just about Sophie's betrayal. It was about my own reaction to it, about how I had let it consume me. I had spent so much time focusing on what she did to me, on how badly she had hurt me, that I hadn't taken the time to think about how I could heal. I had gotten so caught up in seeking justice, in seeking revenge, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. And that's when I understood. Revenge wasn't the answer. It never had been. I had thought it would restore me, but instead, it had just kept me stuck in a cycle of anger and hurt. It had made me believe that I needed to do something to make them feel my pain. But I didn't. I didn't need their acknowledgement, their apology. What I needed was to let go. I needed to forgive them. Not for them, but for me. I began to accept that I could never go back to the way things were. The friendship I had with Sophie, the person I had trusted with my heart, that person was gone. And as much as I wanted to go back to those easier days, I realized that I couldn't. I couldn't keep holding on to what was never going to be again. What I had with Sophie was beautiful in its time, but it had ended, and I needed to let it go. I couldn't keep carrying that dead weight with me. Forgiveness was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It wasn't just about forgiving Sophie. It was about forgiving myself, for letting her in so completely, for trusting her with my heart, for ignoring the signs of what was happening until it was too late. I had to forgive myself for letting the betrayal define me, for letting it control my every thought and action. I had to forgive myself for believing that revenge would heal me, when in reality, it had only kept me stuck in the past. Letting go wasn't easy. It was painful. It was slow, but it was the only way I could move forward. I didn't want to carry the anger and bitterness anymore. I didn't want to feel that tightness in my chest every time I thought of Sophie. I didn't want to let her have that kind of power over me. Not anymore. And so, little by little, I released it. I forgave her. I forgave him. But most of all, I forgave myself. And as I forgave them, as I let go of the past, I started to feel the weight lifting. Slowly, the world around me started to feel less heavy. I began to remember what it was like to live without that constant ache, without that gnawing sense of betrayal. And it wasn't that I had forgotten the pain. I would never forget that. But I had learned how to live with it, how to move forward despite it. I had learned that it wasn't about erasing the hurt. It was about learning to walk with it, to make peace with it. I realized too that forgiveness didn't mean I was weak. It didn't mean that what Sophie and him did to me was okay. It didn't mean I had to let them back into my life. Forgiveness was about freeing myself from the chains of the past. It was about reclaiming my power, my peace, my life. It was about choosing to let go of the things that had been holding me back and embracing the future with open arms. No matter how uncertain it seemed, I learned, through all of this, that there is strength in letting go. There is power in forgiving, in releasing the hold that anger and betrayal can have on you. It's not easy, but it's necessary. And in that forgiveness, I found peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from revenge or retribution. It was the kind of peace that comes from accepting what has happened, learning from it, and choosing to move forward. As time went on, I found new beginnings. I started to rebuild my life, to reclaim the parts of me that I had lost. I made new friends, formed new connections, and began to rediscover who I was outside of the pain of betrayal. I found that, in letting go, I had opened up space for new things to enter my life. I didn't need to hold on to the past anymore. I didn't need to keep carrying the weight of what had happened. The hardest lesson, and the most important one, was that sometimes, the best way to move forward is to let go. Revenge won't fix you. Holding on to anger won't heal you. But forgiveness, that is what frees you. And in that freedom, you can find your way back to yourself. The days stretched on, and slowly I began to feel like myself again. It wasn't an instant transformation, but little by little, I started to see the shift. It wasn't just about forgiving Sophie or him anymore. It was about forgiving myself. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of the anger and bitterness starting to fade. It was still there, lingering like a shadow in the back of my mind, but it didn't consume me the way it once had. It didn't define me. I had let go, and with that letting go, I had started to heal. But even as I started to regain a sense of normalcy, I couldn't shake the feeling of being incomplete. The betrayal had left a mark on me, a scar, one that would never fully disappear. I knew that I could never go back to the way things were. That part of my life had ended. Sophie and I would never be the same, and maybe that was okay. What mattered now was how I moved forward, how I rebuilt myself, piece by piece. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't have to control me anymore. There were moments, especially late at night, when the world around me was quiet and still, when the memories would flood in. I would remember the way Sophie used to look at me, The way we used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. I remembered the moments when I felt like nothing could break our bond, when I believed that no one would ever come between us. And then I remembered what she had done, what they both had done, and the bitterness would resurface, just for a moment. But I would push it away, reminding myself that I was better than that. I was stronger than that. I wasn't going to let them steal any more of my peace. The hardest part wasn't forgiving them. It was learning to live with the fact that people, the ones you trust most, can change. The ones you love can hurt you in ways you never thought possible. It's not something you can prepare for. It's not something you can protect yourself from. You think that if you love someone enough, if you trust them enough, they'll never let you down. But that's not always the case. And that's a hard truth to face. But over time, I began to understand that the only person I could truly control in this situation was myself. The only power I had was the power to decide how I would respond to the hurt, to the betrayal. I could choose to stay stuck in the past, to let it define me, or I could choose to move forward, to learn from it, and to grow. The choice was mine, and I decided that I wasn't going to let them have that power over me any longer. I started to do things for myself, things that brought me joy, things that reminded me who I was, outside of the pain. I began painting again, something I hadn't done in years. I would lose myself in the colors, the brush strokes, the patterns that emerged on the canvas. It was like I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. Each stroke a little bit of the pain released, little by little. I began to travel, to explore new places, new experiences. I surrounded myself with people who reminded me of the good in the world, who helped me see that not everyone would betray me, that not everyone would hurt me the way Sophie did. And yet, even as I moved forward, there were moments when I still felt the sting, when I would see Sophie's name pop up on my phone or hear a song that reminded me of the past. I would feel that pang of loss again, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't all-consuming. It didn't control me. I had learned to live with the pain, to make peace with it. I had learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. And with every step, I grew stronger. I knew that I would always carry the scars of what had happened. They were a part of me now, part of the person I had become. But I had also learned that scars don't define you. They don't control you. They simply remind you of what you've survived, of what you've learned. And with that knowledge, I had begun to rebuild my life. Piece by piece, moment by moment, in the end, what I had thought was the worst thing that could happen to me, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the pain, became the very thing that led me to my strength. I found a depth in myself that I never knew existed. I learned that I didn't need anyone's validation to be whole. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worth it. I had proven that to myself. I was enough just as I was. And that was something I could never forget. As time passed, I began to feel free in a way I hadn't in a long time. Free from the anger, free from the pain, free from the resentment. It wasn't easy. There were days when I still felt the sting, when the memories resurfaced, but I had learned to manage them, to let them pass without allowing them to control me. I had learned that the power to heal was within me, that it was my choice to let go, to forgive, to move forward. And every day, I chose to live for myself, to heal for myself, to be strong for myself. Sophie was no longer a part of my life. She had been a chapter in my story, one that had come to an end. I didn't need to know what she was doing, or where she was, or whether she regretted what happened. That part of my life was over, and I had to let it be. I had to move on, not just for me, but because I knew I couldn't hold on to the past forever. The future was waiting for me, and it was mine to shape. I had learned that betrayal, though painful, was not the end of the road. It was simply a detour, a lesson in disguise, a way for me to find the strength I didn't know I had. It had taken everything from me, but in the end, it had given me everything I needed to rebuild. And now, as I look ahead, I see a future full of possibilities, full of opportunities for growth, for healing, and for love. love for myself, love for the life I was building, and maybe, one day, love for others. But for now, I was content in knowing that I had found peace within myself, that I had learned to forgive, and that I had learned to live again. The pain of betrayal will always be a part of me, but it no longer defines me. I do. As time went on, the pain of betrayal slowly became less sharp, but it never completely disappeared. There were moments when it would rise up again, unexpected, like a wave crashing against the shore. Sometimes it was a passing thought, something that would linger for only a second, before fading back into the background. Other times, it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me, as if I couldn't escape the memories that haunted me. It wasn't that I was forgetting. I would never forget. It was just that the memories, the anger, the hurt, no longer had the power to control me. I had learned how to live with them. I started to rebuild my life, but it wasn't a clean slate. It was more like an old house, weathered and worn, with cracks in the foundation. I knew that I could repair it, that I could make it a home again, but it would take time, and it wasn't going to be perfect. There would be days when the cracks would show again, when the foundation would shake, and I'd have to pick up the pieces. But I had learned to embrace that process. I had learned that life was not about erasing the past, but learning from it, growing from it, and using the pain to build something stronger. The first thing I did was focus on myself. For the longest time, I had poured so much energy into trying to fix what was broken with Sophie, into trying to make sense of her betrayal. I had neglected my own needs, my own desires, and in doing so, I had lost myself along the way. I had allowed her actions to define who I was. But no more. I started doing the things I had always wanted to do, things I had put off for years, because I was so focused on everyone else. I started taking small trips by myself, going to places I had always wanted to visit, but never had the time for. I spent afternoons reading books I had always meant to get to, and I took long walks just to clear my mind. Slowly, I began to rediscover who I was. Outside of the pain, I realized that there was so much of me that had been buried beneath the anger and hurt, things that had been neglected for far too long. It was like peeling back layers of a life I had forgotten. I started to remember the things that made me happy, the things that made me feel alive. And as I did, I felt the healing begin. I also started to surround myself with people who truly cared for me, people who valued me for who I was, not what I could offer them. I had spent so much time with Sophie, invested so much of my energy into that friendship, that I had lost sight of the other relationships that mattered. I reached out to old friends, to family members I had grown distant from, and allowed myself to be surrounded by love and support. The more I opened up to them, the more I realized that not everyone was capable of betrayal. Not everyone would hurt me the way Sophie had. And while I would never forget what happened, I learned that there were still people in my life who would never let me down. As I worked through the pain, I also realized something else, that the love I had for Sophie was real. But it was no longer enough to keep me tied to the past. For a while, I held on to the hope that things would go back to how they were, that somehow Sophie would come to her senses and apologize, that we could fix what was broken. But as time went on, I realized that wasn't going to happen. She had made her choices, and so had I. I had chosen to let go, to walk away, because I knew that the life I was building for myself couldn't include someone who had hurt me so deeply. There were moments when I would think about what Sophie and I had, about the friendship we shared, and I would mourn the loss. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the dreams we had built together, the future we had talked about, the plans that would never come to fruition. I mourned the version of me that had believed in forever, in the unbreakable bond we had. But slowly, I came to realize that mourning wasn't going to help me move forward. It was just another way of keeping myself tied to something that no longer existed. I had to make peace with the fact that people change, relationships change, and sometimes the people you think will always be there are the ones who hurt you the most. But it wasn't the end of my story. It was simply a new chapter, one that I had to write on my own. And so, I began to write, not just with words, but with actions. I started making decisions that were solely for me, not influenced by anyone else. I took control of my own happiness. I started to realize that the future I had imagined with Sophie, the plans we had made, were no longer mine to keep. They were her plans, and they didn't belong to me anymore. I had my own path to follow now, one that was entirely mine, one that didn't need anyone's approval. The process wasn't easy. There were times when I wanted to pick up the phone and call Sophie. Times when I wished I could go back to the way things were. But each time, I reminded myself that the pain of betrayal wasn't just in their actions. It was in my response to them. I didn't need to carry that weight anymore. I didn't need to let her have any more power over me. The strength I had been searching for wasn't in revenge. It wasn't in confrontation. It was in letting go. Letting go of the past, letting go of the hurt, and moving forward. In time, I began to trust again. But this time, I trusted myself more than anyone else. I learned that forgiveness didn't mean excusing the wrongs done to me. It simply meant releasing the hold that anger had on me. Forgiveness was for me, not for them. It was about freeing myself from the burden I had carried for so long. And in that freedom, I found peace. It was a peace that came from within. A peace that didn't depend on anyone else but me. As the months passed, I started to feel the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. The anger I had once felt towards Sophie faded into something less consuming. Something I could acknowledge without letting it rule my life. I didn't forget what happened, and I never would. But I began to see the truth in the old saying, time heals all wounds. Not in the way I expected, not in a perfect, neat way, but in the sense that the pain became less overwhelming. It became something I could carry without letting it crush me. And now, looking back, I see how far I've come. I see how the experience, as painful as it was, has shaped me into someone stronger, someone more resilient. I've learned that I am not defined by the people who hurt me, nor by the pain they caused. I am defined by how I choose to rise from it, by how I choose to move forward. Even when it feels impossible, Sophie may have betrayed me, but in the end, it was I who decided to heal. It was I who chose to forgive, to let go, and to reclaim my life. And that, I've realized, is the greatest strength of all. The further I moved from the heartbreak, the clearer it became that I was evolving. In the midst of the pain, I had found something in myself I didn't even know existed. Resilience. There were days when I still missed the version of myself that had trusted wholeheartedly, that had believed in forever. But that version of me had been tested, had been pushed beyond the limits of what she could handle. And in the process, I learned how to rebuild, how to become someone new. It wasn't that I wanted to forget the past. I just couldn't let it hold me back anymore. For so long, I had held on to the idea of what Sophie and I had been, of the friendship we'd shared. I had tried to preserve it, to fix it, to bring it back to life, even when I knew it was gone. But over time, I began to see that what I was holding on to wasn't the friendship itself, but the comfort it had brought me. Sophie had been my constant, my companion, through thick and thin. And once that constant was gone, I was left standing in a world that felt uncertain and raw. It wasn't easy to admit, but I realized that part of my pain had been the fear of the unknown. Without Sophie, without the life we had built together, I was afraid of being alone, afraid of not being enough without her by my side. But as the months passed, and I focused on rebuilding, I started to realize something. I wasn't alone. I had me. And for the first time in a long time, I began to value that. I began to see the importance of being my own source of strength, of learning how to trust myself, to trust my instincts, and to trust that I could move forward on my own. I had spent so much time focused on Sophie and her betrayal, on the hurt she had caused me, that I had neglected the one person who needed me the most, myself. It was time to stop punishing myself for the choices she had made. It was time to forgive myself for allowing her actions to define my worth. I had thought for so long that forgiveness meant giving her the freedom to walk away without facing the consequences. But I came to realize that forgiveness was never about her. It was about me. When I let go of the anger, I started to see things differently. I realized that the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they had all led me to a new understanding of who I was. I had learned that my worth wasn't defined by anyone else's actions, that my ability to love, to trust, to give wasn't diminished by what had happened. It was only when I stopped focusing on Sophie's betrayal that I started to realize how much I had to offer the world. I began to focus on the things that brought me joy, things I had neglected in the midst of the turmoil. I spent time on hobbies that made me feel alive again, things that reminded me of who I was before the pain. Before the betrayal, I took a trip by myself, something I had always wanted to do, but had never had the courage to. It was freeing. I had spent so many years living for others, trying to make everyone else happy, that I had forgotten how to live for myself. And that trip was the first step in rediscovering who I was, beyond the role I had played in Sophie's life, beyond the hurt and the loss. It was liberating to walk through a new place with no one to answer to, no expectations. It was just me, discovering the world and discovering myself all over again. But despite all the progress I had made, there were still moments of weakness. There were nights when I'd find myself alone and the memories would creep in. Sometimes the anger would flare up again and I'd feel the sting of betrayal all over again. I'd wonder if Sophie ever regretted what she had done, if she thought about the years we spent together, if she ever missed me the way I missed her. But I had learned to let those thoughts pass. I had learned that they didn't serve me anymore. They didn't help me heal. They kept me stuck, rooted in the past, and I couldn't afford to stay there. The most difficult part was realizing that I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't force Sophie to understand the pain she had caused me. I couldn't make her feel the depth of the betrayal. I couldn't change her, and I couldn't change the past. But what I could do was control how I moved forward. What I could do was heal, even if it meant doing it alone. And in that process, I found peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from others apologizing, or from getting the revenge I thought would make me feel better, but the kind of peace that comes from accepting what has happened and choosing to release it. The forgiveness I had fought for, the strength I had built, had taught me that there is no moving forward without letting go. I had thought I could keep one foot in the past while stepping forward into the future, but it doesn't work like that. To heal, to grow, to find peace, you have to let go completely. And that's what I did. I let go of Sophie, of the idea of what our friendship should have been, and of the hurt that kept me trapped in a cycle of anger and pain. Over time, I realized that it wasn't just about forgiving Sophie. It was about forgiving myself for holding on to the hurt for so long. It was about forgiving myself for allowing someone else's actions to dictate my happiness, for letting a betrayal define my worth. And once I did that, I started to see that I was stronger than I had ever known. I had survived something I never thought I would. I had survived the heartache, the confusion, and the loss, and I had come out the other side. As I continued to rebuild my life, I found that I could still love deeply, still trust, still be vulnerable. But now I did it with boundaries. I did it with a stronger sense of self, with an understanding that the only person I could truly rely on was me. And that, I realized, was a lesson that would serve me for the rest of my life. The betrayal had been a painful chapter in my story, but it wasn't the whole story. It was just one part of it. The part that made me stronger, the part that taught me how to heal, how to forgive, and how to move forward. And now, with every step I take, I know that the best is yet to come, because I've learned that no matter how hard the journey, no matter how deep the wounds, I am capable of healing. I am capable of moving on, and I am capable of creating a future full of love, peace, and new beginnings. The months that followed were quieter than I had imagined they would be. I had expected the pain to linger, to haunt me in the form of sleepless nights and sudden memories. But instead, there was a strange stillness. It wasn't complete peace, but it was a peaceful quietness, like a storm that had passed, leaving only the soft aftershocks in its wake. The anger that had once been a constant companion had faded, though not entirely. There were still moments when I would feel the sharp pang of betrayal, but they no longer consumed me. They were just moments, fleeting reminders of what had happened, nothing more. I started focusing on the small things again, the things I had neglected in the midst of the pain, the things that used to bring me joy. I took up old hobbies I had put aside, like painting and writing, things that had always been outlets for my emotions, things that helped me process the world around me. I began to travel, to see new places, not just as an escape, but as a way to find new perspectives, to step outside of the life I had built with Sophie, and realize that there was so much more to explore. And with each new place I visited, each new experience I had, I felt the pieces of me that I had lost coming back together. I also found solace in being around people who truly valued me, people who made me feel whole without expecting anything in return. For so long, I had poured myself into someone else, into a relationship that had drained me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend at the time. But now I began to understand the importance of boundaries. I realized that the love I had for Sophie, for the version of her I had built in my mind, was not the kind of love that truly nourished me. I needed love that was reciprocal, that didn't come with conditions or hidden motives. I needed to love myself first, to create a foundation of self-worth that wasn't reliant on someone else's affection. And as I learned to navigate through my own emotions, I started to realize that the pain wasn't something I needed to hold on to anymore. It wasn't something that defined me, and I didn't have to carry it as a badge of honor. It wasn't something that gave me strength. I realized that I had always thought forgiveness was about giving the other person peace. I thought forgiving Sophie meant she would have some sort of redemption. But in truth, forgiving her was about giving myself peace. It was about releasing the grip that resentment had on me, releasing the hold it had over my heart. Forgiveness didn't mean excusing what happened. It didn't mean that what she did was okay. It just meant that I was ready to let go of the anger. I was ready to move on. I started to let go of the idealized version of Sophie I had clung to for so long. I had believed in the friendship we shared, in the promises we made to each other, and in the idea that we would always be there for one another. But that belief had been shattered, and the more I held on to it, the more it kept me stuck. The person I had been in that friendship, the person who trusted so completely, had to be left behind too. I had to let her go, and in doing so, I realized something important, that I was stronger than I had ever realized. Through all of this, I had learned something critical about myself. I had learned that I was capable of surviving heartbreak. I was capable of surviving betrayal. I was capable of picking up the pieces and moving forward, even when everything felt like it was falling apart. The strength I had been searching for was never about seeking revenge. It was never about proving a point to anyone else. It was about proving to myself that I could endure, that I could rise from the ashes of my own pain and rebuild a life that was my own. The people who had hurt me, who had broken my trust, they no longer had the power to control my story. I did. There were still moments of doubt, of course. There were nights when I would wake up in the dark and feel the weight of the betrayal settle over me again. But in those moments, I reminded myself that I had already survived the worst of it. I had already come through the storm, and I knew that, in time, the memories would fade. The anger would continue to subside. The peace I was searching for would eventually find me. It wasn't about forcing it. It was about allowing myself to heal at my own pace, to trust that, with time, the wounds would scar over and I would be stronger for it. I began to see the world through a new lens, one that wasn't clouded by the pain of the past. I had learned to embrace life as it came, to find joy in the small moments, and to stop looking for validation in places that could never give it to me. I was enough, just as I was. I didn't need anyone else to prove that to me. In the end, the betrayal had taught me far more than I wanted to learn. It had taught me that trust is fragile, that people are capable of hurting you in ways you never thought possible. But it also taught me that I was capable of healing. I was capable of forgiving. I was capable of moving on. It had forced me to confront my deepest fears, my darkest emotions, and it had made me realize that the only person I needed to answer to was myself. I no longer needed anyone's approval. I had found my own strength, my own voice, and as I look ahead, I realize that there is so much more to my story, so many more chapters to write. I know there will be challenges ahead. There will be times when I am tested again, but I also know that I am ready. I am ready to face whatever comes my way, because I have learned that nothing, no one, can take away my power unless I let them. And I'm not going to let anyone do that again. I've learned how to trust myself, how to love myself, and how to let go of the past. And with that, I know I'm ready for whatever the future holds. I didn't realize how much of myself I had lost until I finally started to get it back. There were days, even after everything, when I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had healed in so many ways, rebuilt parts of myself that had been shattered, but there was still that lingering emptiness, a quiet whisper of the past that I couldn't fully silence. The people who had left a mark on me, for better or worse, continued to shape the way I saw the world and myself. But the more I allowed myself to just be, the less power those past experiences had over me. I started taking steps towards a new version of myself, a version that was unafraid of being alone, unafraid of embracing the unknown. For so long, I had defined myself by my relationships with others. With Sophie, with the people who had come and gone, I had lost my sense of self in the hope that I could find it in someone else. But once the weight of betrayal had lifted, I began to realize that my happiness, my sense of worth, couldn't come from anyone but me. The quiet stillness that followed the storm became a kind of peace, a peace I had never known before. I started to understand the importance of solitude, not as something to fear, but as something to cherish. The moments I spent alone weren't moments of loneliness. They were moments of discovery. I learned to enjoy my own company, to listen to the thoughts inside my head without judgment, without the need to rush them away. There was a beauty in that stillness, a kind of freedom that I had never experienced. I found myself letting go of the last remnants of resentment, the little things I had been holding onto in the hopes that they would give me some sense of closure. I started to realize that closure wasn't something I could get from anyone else. It was something I had to give myself. I didn't need Sophie to apologize or make amends. I didn't need him to acknowledge the hurt he had caused me. What mattered was that I had already forgiven them, and that was enough. What mattered was that I had freed myself from the weight of the past. The world around me didn't stop because of what had happened. Life continued to move forward, with or without my permission. And in that forward motion, I found new experiences, new opportunities that I would have never imagined before. I began to form new friendships, to connect with people who made me feel valued, people who didn't take advantage of my trust, people who didn't use my vulnerabilities against me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could let my guard down without fear of being hurt. I learned that trust wasn't something I could give away blindly, but it also wasn't something I had to withhold out of fear. I could trust again, but this time it would be on my terms, at my pace. I wasn't the same person who had blindly trusted Sophie. I wasn't the same person who had given away pieces of herself, hoping that they would be loved in return. I was someone stronger now, someone wiser, someone who had learned the hard way that love and trust had to come from within before they could be given to anyone else. But even with all the progress I had made, there were still times when the pain crept back in, times when I would be reminded of what I had lost, of what could have been. I would see old pictures, hear old songs, and for a split second, it would all come rushing back. The laughter, the easy companionship, the promises we had made. I would feel that familiar pang of grief, that longing for what I thought was forever. But it no longer consumed me. It no longer defined me. I had learned to let those moments pass, to acknowledge them without letting them control me. There were days when I thought I was done with the pain, when I thought I had fully healed, only for it to sneak up on me again. But now, when it came, I didn't run from it. I didn't try to push it away. I sat with it, let it wash over me, and then let it go. I learned that healing wasn't a linear process. It wasn't something that could be fixed in an instant. It was a constant, evolving journey, with steps forward and steps back. But each step, no matter how small, brought me closer to the person I was meant to be. I also learned that moving on didn't mean erasing the past. It didn't mean pretending like everything that happened had never happened. The memories, the lessons, the pain, they all shaped me, but they didn't have to define me. What mattered now was how I chose to live with them, how I chose to use them to fuel my growth instead of holding me back. As the months turned into years, I could see the transformation in myself. I was no longer the person I had been before Sophie's betrayal. I had shed that version of me. That version who relied on others for validation. That version who thought that love and loyalty from others was the only way to feel whole. I had become someone who could stand on her own, who knew her worth without needing anyone else to prove it. I had learned that love and friendship were not about perfection. They weren't about never making mistakes or never hurting each other. They were about growth, about understanding, about forgiveness, for yourself and for others. And in the end, I had learned that I was worthy of the kind of love that was unconditional, the kind of love that respected my boundaries, the kind of love that would never betray me. I didn't need to be defined by the people who had left or hurt me. I was defined by the person I was becoming, by the strength I had found within myself, by the lessons I had learned along the way. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that the best was yet to come, not because I had revenge, not because I had gotten closure, but because I had finally learned to let go, to forgive, and to live for myself. I had given so much of myself away in the past, hoping to be loved, hoping to be valued. But now I gave to myself. I loved myself, and that, I realized, was all I ever really needed. As time continued to pass, I found myself learning new lessons with every step I took. Each day became a little bit easier, a little bit lighter. The shadows of the past didn't loom over me as much anymore. I had learned to live in the present, to focus on the now, instead of constantly looking over my shoulder at what had happened. The betrayal, the hurt, they were still there, buried deep, but they no longer dictated my every action. I had taken back control of my life, and it felt liberating. At first, I was terrified of being hurt again. I was scared that I would fall into the same traps, that I would trust the wrong person, that I would allow someone else to break me the way Sophie had. But as I grew stronger, I realized that my fear didn't have to rule me. I was no longer afraid of vulnerability. I had learned that it was okay to open my heart again, even if there was a risk of getting hurt. Because the truth was, you couldn't truly experience life, the joy, the connection, the love, if you kept your heart closed off. And I refused to live in fear anymore. I started allowing myself to trust again. But this time, I did it differently. I trusted cautiously, but I trusted fully. I didn't expect perfection from the people around me, but I also didn't expect betrayal. I learned that the only way to form real, meaningful relationships was to allow others to see me, truly see me, without the walls I had built up to protect myself. I could still be cautious, but I didn't have to let fear dictate my choices. I met new people, built new friendships, and even opened myself up to love again. The relationships were different than before, but that was okay. I didn't need to replicate what I had with Sophie. I didn't need to recreate the past. What mattered was that I was living for today with people who saw me for who I truly was, not who they wanted me to be. There were still moments when I felt a pang of longing for the way things had been with Sophie. I would remember the good times, the laughter we shared, the plans we made for the future, and for a brief moment, I'd wish things had turned out differently. But those moments were fleeting now. I didn't dwell on them. I didn't let them consume me. I had learned that it was okay to mourn the loss of something that once meant so much to me, but I couldn't live in that mourning forever. Life was too short to spend it looking back at what was lost. I had to look ahead to what was coming. As I continued to grow and evolve, I realized that the real victory wasn't in getting revenge or making them feel the weight of their betrayal. The real victory was in my ability to heal, to forgive, and to let go. I had taken what was broken, and piece by piece, I had rebuilt myself. And that rebuilding wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, and often felt like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I kept going. I kept moving forward, because I knew that I was capable of more than I had ever given myself credit for. When I thought about what had happened, I no longer felt anger. I didn't even feel sadness. Instead, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for the strength I had discovered within myself, and for the people who had shown me that love didn't have to come with conditions, with expectations. Real love, real friendship, was about respect, mutual growth, and the understanding that people, at their core, are imperfect. The experience had taught me that I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. I didn't need to chase validation from others. I didn't need to explain myself, or try to fix things, or force apologies out of people who weren't capable of offering them. I was enough. I had always been enough. And once I accepted that truth, I stopped seeking answers from anyone but myself. I stopped needing the approval of others to feel whole. I stopped looking for closure from the people who had hurt me. Instead, I closed the door on that chapter of my life and moved forward with my head held high. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the wrongs done to you. It wasn't about giving someone a free pass for hurting you. It was about releasing the control that anger and resentment had over you. It was about taking back your peace, your power, and your ability to move forward. The scars that remained from the betrayal were a reminder of how far I had come. They weren't ugly. They weren't something to be ashamed of. They were a testament to my resilience, to my ability to rise from the ashes and rebuild. They reminded me that I had loved deeply, and that in itself was beautiful. As I looked at my life now, I saw the potential for everything that had been taken from me. It wasn't gone. It had simply been transformed. I had learned to trust again, not with blind faith, but with a grounded understanding of my own worth. I had learned to love again, but this time, I loved myself first. And in that love, I found the strength to move forward, to build the life I deserved. A life not defined by betrayal, but by the strength I had discovered within myself. And so, as the days and months went on, I continued to embrace the future. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but I knew I was ready. I had survived the worst of it, and now nothing could hold me back. I had learned to love without fear, to trust without hesitation, and to walk through life with my head held high, knowing that no matter what happened, I would always have the strength to carry on.